Do you recognize the difference between a reaction and a response? Reactions are instinctive. They are purely led by our emotions. When you react to a situation, you rarely consider the long-term consequences, which is why we so often have the tendency to look back and think that maybe, just maybe, we may have overreacted a tiny bit. But in an instant, when our emotions were high, that was our authentic reaction. Our response comes after. It's what happens when we take a beat and consider the long-term consequences and what we'd like to come out of the situation. We are in control of our thoughts and make decisions that align with our core values and goals. But it's so very easy to react when we are in the heat of the moment. We don't need to use any willpower, self-control, or mental strength. We don't consider how others will feel. Our reactions come directly from the emotions that are within us. Growth comes from realizing that we can't control what arises in us, but we can control our response to it. For most of us, this doesn't come naturally. I know that this is an issue that I have to deal with. Something happens and feelings arise within me. I react poorly, and then I'm reacting poorly not only to the situation that caused it, but then I also find myself beating myself up about the thoughts or feelings that were even arising in the first place. I know that I need to work on simply recognizing what arises, acknowledge those thoughts or feelings, and that it's okay for me to have them. But then I also need to work on controlling my reactions. But what if we began now, today, by noting the emotions that start to bubble to the surface without judging them? So when your husband makes plans, forgetting that you already have plans, or your teenager leaves a mess right in the middle of the floor upstairs, or forgets to go to an important National Honor Society meeting in the morning, or leaves their uniform at home, or when the dog gets into the trash as you're ready to leave the house, and so you have to pick up paper towels that are strewn all over the floor. Or is this just my house this morning? Or when your boss sends you an email criticizing something that you've done that really you shouldn't have had to do because it's his job. Or when you see a social media post of an event that you wish you had been invited to. Realize it's okay to have emotions arise within you. Note them without judgment, but like a storm cloud passing by, allow the emotional reaction to pass and respond as you actually want to, with thought, consideration, and intentionality. But if you don't happen to catch those emotions in time before they bubble up to the surface, give yourself some grace. Instead of reacting then to your reaction, use it as an opportunity. Note your poor reaction and use it as a chance to be thoughtful and considerate to yourself, and acknowledge that you're a work in progress, and respond with kindness and self-love. As my kids have become teens, I've gradually felt cocooned off. I thought it was just me, but then I started hearing the same from other moms who felt like their worlds had gotten much smaller. Communication changes. Our identities are becoming ours again. But who are we? The issues that we face with our teens, they aren't the ones that many of us feel comfortable talking about. And we see the finish line ahead, the point where we're supposed to let go. But our identities have been so intertwined. So many people talk about the transition to motherhood, but few talk about just how hard the transition out is and how solitary. So that's what we're going to do. Grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and let's have that conversation. In this podcast, grounded in family communication theory, I share what I have learned as a communication scholar for over 20 years and what I'm learning as the mom of 3 teens. It's time to be seen beyond the frame of our children, beyond the frame of motherhood. It's time to ask, what do I want? Who do I want to be? It's time to reframe me. Hey guys, it's Jen. On today's episode, we're talking about rules in our families. We've repeatedly talked about our families as systems that function as a whole. Last time we had a conversation about roles and the roles that each individual family member plays in the family system. Rules set the boundaries that protect those roles. I feel like when the kids were younger, rules were clear. Don't touch that. Turn on your listening ears. We don't say she's stupid. Bedtime is at 8. No snacks before dinner. You cannot jump off the slide. As teenagers, none of these rules exist anymore. I mean, I would kill for some good listening ears. But that doesn't mean rules don't exist anymore. They've just evolved like our family system. In fact, I've had more friends reach out with issues involving rules, so I definitely think that it warrants a conversation for us to have. So, what exactly are rules? Family rules set up boundaries to maintain the roles that we hold. Rules are relationship agreements. They are established through interaction episodes that we have over time. It's like they prescribe and limit what behaviors certain family members do and what behaviors certain family members don't do. Now, they can be certainly clear, like bedtime at 8 or curfew is at 10. Those are very clear. They can also be recommendations for certain behaviors in the house. And I know that I have a certain issue going on in our house recently. And I know it's my own fault, and I have set this up, and it doesn't matter how many times my husband tells me that it's my own fault that this has become the rule. It's what's going on. And now I need to figure out what to do about it. But we have a rule in our house now, apparently, that I clean up after everybody. And this is something like other rules that has developed through interaction. So over time, one person's behavior and then the other people's response to the behavior establishes what this rule or these rules are. So inadvertently, I have set up the rule that I will come behind everyone and clean up their mess. So let me just set the stage for you. My house has clothes all over it at all times. Like, I don't even know how this happens. And I'm not talking about like the bedrooms or the bathroom. We're not even getting to that point. I'm talking about like downstairs, like living area. Living room has hoodies or socks, one sock over here and one sock over there. Or the kitchen has a t-shirt in the middle of the counter or shoes everywhere. Like, I don't even understand how this happens. Like, that's not something I do. I don't just walk around the house and peel off clothing and just toss it wherever. And let's establish I get it. It's not like my house is strewn with clothes, but I will say at all given times, there is one or two of these items somewhere throughout the lower level at all times. Okay. And then you take a little walk upstairs, and that's where the real mess happens. That's where you go into the kids' rooms and there's clothes strewn all over the floor. Or the bathroom, because everybody individually goes in and takes their clothes off to take a shower, and then no one picks them up. So there's like at least 3, if not more, depending how many showers we've had since I've been in there to clean up, piles of clothing on the bathroom floor. And then you tiptoe over into the bedroom, and not only is there the clothes all over the floor, but hey, the wet towels from said showers, those are also there. And so it bothers me a lot more than it bothers the kids. So it doesn't matter how many times I have said, pick up your clothes after you take a shower, pick up your towels, pick up your stuff. It doesn't happen. And so they have now essentially helped me establish through these interactions the rule, the unintentional rule, that I come behind everybody and I pick things up. All right. So that's now an apparent rule that I'm quite unhappy with, but in our house. So if I am up there and they are in the house and I say, come and clean up your clothes, or come and pick up the towels on your floor, or come clean up the bathroom. There's also a rule, though, which has again been established over time, that when I say something, they do listen. So that's something that we have established as a rule as well, that if I say to come and do something, they do come and do it. Now, I need to take a step back and not make you think my children are up on this pedestal. It's not like mom says jump and they say how high. I mean, it might be after me saying 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times to come and pick it up, they will pick it up. So that's another rule, is that if I tell them to do something, they do it. But we also have this rule that I will come behind and I will clean everything up for people. So they're relationship agreements that establish expectations that people have, positive or negative, but expectations that people have for each other and for each other's behaviors. They occur due to these repetitive patterns of behavior. So some of them are established because of a need for it. So do your homework after school. As soon as you get home, get your homework done. That is something that is established because of a need to get something done. Setting a curfew is the need to have a limit of when a child needs to come home. But others, like picking up, or like cell phone usage, or like who gets up with the kids at night when they need something, or who wakes people in the morning, those are due to repetitive patterns of behavior. So just as they happen, we start to know what we can expect, and then that becomes the rules. These are guidelines that we have that reduce our uncertainty, because just like with roles, we don't like to have uncertainty in our life. We like to know what we can expect. We like to know how to behave. And so rules establish, if I make fun of my sister, this is how she is going to respond. So there is a rule about what you should do and what you shouldn't do or say to your sister, because this is how she will respond. There are rules about who is responsible for what around the house, who is going to pay the bills, who is going to take out the trash, who is going to make sure that cars have oil changed, and who is going to feed the pets, those types of things, so that we know who is responsible for what. And they give us these guidelines that reduce uncertainty, because we don't want to walk into each day uncertain about how people are going to respond to us, or how people are going to behave, or who's going to get things done. We like to have that certainty in our lives. And so we are constantly assigning these rules to establish the different behaviors. Rules can define what kinds of actions are permitted or allowed, as well as what kind of things we like, what is preferred, what is encouraged, what are we going to reward, or what are we going to punish. And so that's how we establish, through these interactions, the different family members coordinate what they expect. And so we get different meanings from the behaviors, because family systems require a degree of predictability in order to survive. And so the most highly functioning families know what they can expect from people, know what the rules are, so that everything doesn't have to be renegotiated each day. And so when a family doesn't know what is expected of them, or doesn't know what kind of behavior is going to be tolerated, are they going to laugh when I tell a joke, or are they going to yell at me? Are they going to pick something up after me, or am I going to be punished? When they don't know this on a day-to-day basis, and so they have to constantly renegotiate expectations every day, you would have little energy for anything else. And so the most highly functioning, the strongest family systems know what they can expect out of individuals and out of relationships. And so families have these rules that guide a behavior to provide this framework for how the family functions. Sometimes you have actions that are very difficult to understand individually, but when you look at it in terms of the framework for family rules, they make sense. So that's when we say that you can't really understand the family's system and how the whole family operates without seeing the whole. Like if you just saw a behavior independently, then you wouldn't understand it because you have to have the whole context there. I was in the car with my daughter and her friends the other day, and they got into this discussion. I heard them in the back about swearing. And my daughter said, my mom wouldn't mind if I swear. Okay, mind you, she's 13 and she doesn't swear. And so, but she said, my mom wouldn't care. And she said, would you care? I said, no, I really wouldn't. It's just not something that is at the top of my list. I have enough things to worry about and enough, things that I concern myself with and their behavior that swearing, it seems arbitrary to me. That's just a meaning that somebody arbitrarily assigned to a word. And so, no, it doesn't bother me. I mean, my kids have listened to the unedited non-radio versions of music since they were born. Okay. It's not something new to them. And whereas the other girl in the car, she said, oh, my mom would slap me across the face if I said a cuss word. And another girl said, my mom would punish me if I ever swore. And, my daughter is like, well, can I swear? And so, well, you know what? If it fits the situation and it really doesn't bother me. And so for my house, they don't swear, but if they did, there would be no punishment. So essentially, even if they aren't, there's no rule about it. Whereas those girls, there are punishments within their house for that behavior. So in their house, that is a rule. Whereas in my house, we have rules for things that possibly they don't. So if you heard a child swear, you would have to know the context of the family to know if this is an issue or not. However, we have always had a very blatant, explicit rule that there is no bad language in front of Hanny and Poppy or at school. Because growing up, that was definitely something in my house that we were not allowed to swear. So that is a thing. You don't swear in front of Hanny and Poppy, and obviously you don't swear at school. So the rule does exist in certain circumstances, but you have to know the context and the framework to completely understand it. A few different characteristics we should probably talk about with rules. Understand rules are probabilities. They're not laws. They're not static. They have to change over time. So you might not have had a curfew for your child before they were maybe teenagers and going out. But then, I have a 16-year-old and now he needs a time to come home. Well, right now his time has to be by 9 o'clock because he doesn't have his after 9 permit. So he can't be out driving after 9. So that is essentially his curfew. Well, once he gets that license, then he's going to be able to stay out later. And then we are going to have to evolve and figure out his new curfew. So rules are something that are constantly changing with the development of the social system. And they just kind of give a prescription for your behavior. They don't guarantee it. So just because you may have a prescription that this rule is going to lead to not talking back, well, that does not guarantee that your teenager is not going to talk back. Just because you have a rule that homework gets done and that studying is done for exams doesn't mean and doesn't guarantee that your child is going to study. And doesn't mean they're going to do good on their exam because they're just probabilities. It's not a law. Now, another characteristic is the types of rules that rules can be explicit rules or implicit rules. All right. Explicit rules are things that are talked about and verbally agreed to. All right. So I said that I've heard from a number of friends on rules, and a couple of them kind of go into these explicit rules and implicit rules category. So a number of people have asked me about the proper age, in my opinion, for cell phones. That seems to be a really big discussion of young teen, preteen, young teen parents, is what is the right age to let a child have a cell phone, let a child use social media. And so that becomes, in households, everything to do with getting a phone and getting the use of social media. And then once you do have it, then about the use of that phone and of social media are usually very explicit rules. They're things that get talked about, things that are verbally agreed to. So a lot of families believe, due to research that they've seen or opinions that they have heard, that children are not developed enough to be responsible with the use of social media, and they're cognitively not developed, and they can't handle the emotional pressures of using social media, and then the behavioral issues that come from using social media and cell phones. And so a lot of people believe that it's when they're 13 or when they're in high school, that they need to be older. That young middle school especially is too young of an age for these technologies. Now, when I am asked that question, I have a different opinion. My opinion is that the earlier you can give your child a cell phone and allow your children to use social media, in my opinion, the better. And the reason I say this is because when you give your children a cell phone and social media at a young age, you have the ability to teach them the proper way to use it. So instead of just handing your 13 or 14-year-old a cell phone and a TikTok account and saying, yeah, be good, instead, you hand a younger child, maybe 11, all right, you hand 10, 11 years old, you give them access to these technologies. But at that point, when they are, say, 10 years old, there is zero expectation of privacy. So you can sit side by side with them and teach them how to use these platforms. So instead of giving them full reign and wondering why they don't know how to use it responsibly, you are keeping an eye on what they are posting, seeing what content they are looking at. You can read their text messages without any expectation that eyes are off. It's something that you can co-pilot with them. You're not just giving them something that is really a dangerous tool. So my 16-year-old, I wouldn't have just handed him a car and keys and said, yeah, go be careful. That's not how it would work. All right. The only reason that I was even moderately okay with doing that is because we spent a year with his permit and me 60 hours in the passenger seat, guiding him and teaching him the proper way to use this dangerous vehicle, telling him how you slow down at certain places. How do you go around these curves? How far back do you have to stop from an intersection? How long do you wait at a stop sign? Keep an eye out down there, because when you look to your right, you can't see cars that are coming around the curve. All of those different things that I've told him through this co-piloting of the last year. I know that I have input into his knowledge base of how to use that dangerous vehicle. And when I gave my children their cell phones and I allowed them to create Snap accounts and Instagram accounts and TikTok accounts, I did so with the idea that I was going to monitor all of this and I would help them along. And that's exactly what I've done. Had I waited until they were older, I would not have grown with the technology, because I will admit my system for doing it and giving it to them young places a huge responsibility on you, the parent. It really does, because it means that you have to follow along with what they are doing. You have to go into their phones and you have to read messages. You have to be aware of if they have a spam account. You have to know who they're following and what feeds they are seeing. You have to be on it. And I get it. That's a lot of work, especially if it's not platforms that you use. You have to figure out how to do them. I get that that's a lot of work, but I think it's so important, because then you can see when mistakes are being made. You can see a TikTok that's inappropriate for an 11-year-old. Okay. I took down some TikToks that I saw my 11-year-old doing the dance. I mean, 11 at the time, doing the dances and 2 songs. And it's like, oh, no, you have no idea what that means, but we are not posting that. So you can do that when they're young like that. I know we had an issue come up in a group text with my middle when he was about in, I think it would have been 6th grade, because 7th was the COVID year. So I think it was prior to that totally, but 6th grade. And there was this massive, all 6th graders text chain that blew up and just was out of control. And the things that were being said on there were awful. And there were all sorts of people getting in trouble. And that's when I'm like, we are not doing that. We are not participating in a large group text ever. That's not it. There's not even an option. So from that, the rule became that you can't be in a text chain with more than 3 people. All right. So that was then a rule that became established because of giving it to him and watching this happen and talking to him about what he saw that was appropriate, what he saw that wasn't appropriate, what led to problems, what things should you never put in writing, right? Isn't that the thing? Dance like no one's watching, but text like it's going to be read with a subpoena in court. And so, you have to teach them these things, and it's much easier to do it at a young age, because now with my 16-year-old, and honestly, really even with my 14-year-old at this point, I would go in if I really felt that there was a problem. Obviously, yes, technically it's my phone, it's my account. Yes, I have the rights, so to speak, to go in and look at whatever I want. But personally, I feel like at this point, that's an invasion of privacy. I really almost feel like it's, I wouldn't read a journal. And unless I had something really to be concerned about, I shouldn't have to go in and read his private messages to his friends. So now that ship has sailed. And so I have to look at it that I have instilled over the last number of years of co-piloting on this technology. I have instilled what is right and what is wrong. How do you do this and what don't you do? What do you say? What do you post? All of the different things that go along with using a cell phone. So those I would recommend to anyone who is asking me about the proper age for those technologies. Those are explicit rules. You set explicit rules on what age you can use a cell phone, on what social media platforms you can use, on what do you post, what don't you post, explicit rules, things that are verbally agreed upon and talked about. My kids still, they put their phones on the charger in my room at night. They don't need to use their phones during the night, especially on school nights. But now I let my oldest keep it in his room when it's not an early morning the next morning. So on weekends or days he doesn't have football or something like that, he's allowed to keep it in there. But if he has to get up early, still goes on the charger in my room. Those are just explicit rules that we have. Implicit rules are the kind that you don't talk about, and it may not be a subject of conversation at all until it's broken. So the rule itself is not necessarily ever verbally agreed to, not necessarily negotiating, but somehow everyone understands it. And so nobody talks about it. unless it gets broken. So I had a friend ask me about an issue that she was having, to go back to social media and phone use, between her son and her daughter, that her kids appear to be around two of mine's, give or take. And the son has a new girlfriend, and it's the first time he's had a girlfriend. And the daughter, she befriended the girl on Snapchat. And so the two of them started snapping back and forth, which turned into chatting with each other, which apparently her son found out about. And he was upset, first of all, that she had established this relationship with the girlfriend without his knowledge, without his permission. And he felt like some of the things that she was telling the girlfriend were personal, and some of them were, he thought, were making him look bad. So that we're saying mean things about him, or making him just look not good in the eyes of the girlfriend. And so he was upset about this. Now, prior to that situation occurring in their house, there was an implied rule that you wouldn't make a bad situation for your sibling with a new girl or boy, depending who it was, but it wasn't talked about. And so he thought that he just had this expectation, but she did not adhere to it. And so it was an implicit rule that hadn't been discussed about what is the appropriate behavior for you on social media with your siblings, friends, or girlfriends, or whatever. And so she didn't adhere to that. So he punished her by being upset about it. Then brought in the mother, who apparently overreacted and yelled at the daughter for this behavior. And so that was a negative reaction, which punished the behavior. So it wasn't an explicit rule of what don't you adhere to. And so that's where the problem came in, is that the rule was implicit, which means that some of the people knew it, but others hadn't discussed it, and it wasn't understood by everyone. So that was a rule that needed to be an explicit rule. So after the situation, what they need to do is they need to establish some ground rules, some actually talked about, verbally agreed to, explicit rules on what kind of interactions can happen between you and your brother's friends, or you and your brother's girlfriend. Now, other implicit rules are things that maybe might be, for example, if you have a family member who has a substance abuse problem, or a mental health issue, or parents who argue a lot, things that you don't really have to say, you don't talk about these, but it's implied that you don't talk about it. And it seems that everyone kind of understands you don't talk about these things outside of the house. Similarly, you might have an implicit rule that you don't embarrass your parents in public. You don't embarrass your parents with poor behavior. And you don't have to say it. It's just implied. And the only way you would even know it was a rule was if it was broken, and then you would have to make it an explicit rule. And so these explicit or implicit rules, oftentimes it's what's acceptable or unacceptable to certain family members. Also, rules exist at different levels. So you have personal rules, you have dyadic rules, you have subsystem rules, you have the family system rules, and then you also have like extended family system rules. And so it's just refers to how many people are involved in these rules. Some rules are personal rules, and personal rules you don't even think of as being a family rule, and they don't come into play with the family unless it supports or conflicts with a family rule. So, for example, my personal rule might be to clean up. make sure the house looks nice, make sure the house is straightened up, make sure there isn't stuff all around. That's a personal rule for me. That doesn't impact anybody else. It's personal. The only time that it gets into family, and that's when you start to have a conflict, is when that personal rule conflicts with the family's rule, which apparently is leave everything out. And so, because I have allowed the leaving things out and not cleaning up after yourself as to apparently become the rule, that interfaces with my personal rule, which makes a family conflict, which is what leads me to have established this new rule, which is I clean up after everybody. So personal rules only exist at the family level when they conflict or support a family system rule. Dyadic rules are ones that govern two people, whether it's two siblings, a mother and a child, a father and a child, or a couple. So the different rules about the two-person behavior. Subsystem then are three people or higher. And so that could be like a group of siblings. What rules about how those siblings interact? And so that could also go back to that mom's issue with the daughter and the friend, is that that's now, well, you might have a certain rule that governs the siblings, and that behavior of what's appropriate might be different than what guides and how you treat somebody outside of the system. So teasing about a brother might work within the family, but teasing about a brother outside of the family, that could be a conflict. And so you have this subsystem's rules. The family system then obviously has rules. Those are all the ones that we really talk about. Those are the ones of how, just in general, do we work hard? How do we behave? How do we treat others with kindness? Those are family system rules. And so they govern the behavior of a family as a whole. And those typically are grounded in what are the values of the family itself. Then you also have extended family system rules, and those are the ones that manage the interactions between the nuclear family and the families of origin. And so it might be, where are holidays? Who hosts holidays? Growing up, I know that it was my one aunt. Every Thanksgiving, we went to her house. That was just the rule. My mom, I remember, always wanted Thanksgiving at her house, and she didn't get Thanksgiving because the rule was it was at my aunt's house. Now that's changed, and just because, like, fall's my thing, Thanksgiving's my holiday. And so I host a whole multi-day Thanksgiving weekend extravaganza. And so the rule is that Jen hosts Thanksgiving weekend. All of the parts, I make the plans for everybody. I make sure that all the logistics work. I fill up my house with people, and I manage that holiday because that's an extended family system rule. There are also generational relationships that need to have rules because of the overlap with the different layers. So, for example, my daughter and I have a very close relationship. We are just, more so than close, I think is open, just a very open relationship. And we talk about anything. And there's nothing really that I'm uncomfortable with talking about with her. And I don't mind her asking me things. And because of the historical precedent for that, she's comfortable to tell me things that I know I would not have talked to my mother about. Now, I was close to my mother. I am close to my mother still, but we don't have that same kind of open communication relationship, nor have we ever, that I have with my daughter. Now, my mom and my daughter are also very close. And so they spend a lot of time together. They're super close. And so because she equates the open, close relationship with me to the one with my mother, she ends up disclosing information and having conversations with my mother that my mother is really ill-prepared and uncomfortable with. And so my daughter will mention to me, oh, I told Hanny about, and internally I cringe, and I hope it's just internal, but it might not be. Internally I cringe like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did not say that to her. And she says how that Hanny doesn't respond very positively when she'll tell her these things. And so it's like she's not understanding the generational relationship is different. And so there are rules about what you have open boundaries of disclosure to me versus the self-disclosure to her grandmother. And so there are rules within the extended family system as well. A main characteristic to keep in mind with any types of rules is that rules are enforced by sanctions. Sanctions are there to enforce rules and punish people who violate the rule. It's the built-in feedback mechanism of a rule. So if you have a rule and the rule is broken and there is a sanction, there is a punishment for it, then that's the rule. So if your curfew is 10 o'clock and the child comes home at 10:30, they broke the rule. And so then there needs to be a punishment for it. And so that sanction of whether it's you can't go out the next weekend or you lose technology privileges or whatever the punishment is, that means that the next time they go out, you can have the rule of 10 o'clock curfew. However, if you have a rule of 10 o'clock curfew and they come home at 10:30 and you're like, why weren't you home? And then that's it. Guess what? You don't have a 10 o'clock curfew. So the rule ceases to exist when you don't have a sanction for it. Sanctions, these negative sanctions can be overt or they can be covert. So an overt sanction might be just that, grounding somebody, saying you can't go out the next weekend, taking away a privilege. That would be an overt negative sanction. But sometimes you can have things that are also more covert. Things like making you feel guilty about something. So if you don't go to your child's event and they make you feel guilty for not being there, that's an covert negative sanction. So you know that the rule is you have to go to their events. And so that guilt serves as a punishment. And so if you'd like to avoid that punishment in the future, then you don't break the rule. Things that are silence, pouting, cold shoulder, withdrawing from a conversation. Those are also punishments. So you know you broke the rule. And so because you broke the rule, someone's pouting or someone's giving you the cold shoulder or someone is giving you the silent treatment. Oh, the silent treatment. Nothing makes me crazier than the silent treatment. Okay, because I just can't, I don't subscribe to silent treatment. I can't do it. I just last for like 10 seconds and I'm done. So, but my husband, man, he can pout and give the silent treatment as a punishment like no one else. And so that's a covert negative sanction that shows me or shows you that you broke the rules. And so that is just about as much of a feedback mechanism as a punishment as any overt, like taking a privilege away type of thing. And any time that the punishment is not invoked for a rule violation, now all of a sudden that rule ceases to be a rule and it's up for discussion. Keep in mind that these family rules, they're there for a purpose. They allow us to coordinate the interactions within our families, that to make us not have to constantly reevaluate things, to provide that stability that we talked about already, how predictable, to keep it comfortable so that you know that what you can expect from each other, whether it's behavior wise, whether it's emotion wise, communication wise, but we can predict the responses that we are going to get, which makes us more comfortable. And so in general, the more consistent and the more predictable the responses are that we get from our family members, the more stable the system is. And these family rules, they regulate boundaries. They're frameworks for the boundaries around the role within the network, keeps the system regulated, keeps it moving smoothly. And so whether it's, who is in charge of what duty around the house, what are the chores, what are the responsibilities, that can be rules. Those can be rules that keep the system functioning smoothly so that every time something occurs, we don't have to figure out, okay, who's going to do it this week? Or status and authority, who makes decisions? Who do we have to listen to? Who do we follow? Are we respectful? Do you interrupt? What is the hierarchy of the family? The rules establish that so that you always know where you fall. You know what's appropriate behavior-wise. You know how available a family member is going to be emotionally, physically. You know that they're going to be there so that children or teenagers don't have to wonder, is my mom going to be willing to listen to me today? Can I talk to my father about a problem that I'm having? How receptive will someone be to me? And so if you make it consistent with your teenagers, they know what they can come to you with and what they can't. I know that just last evening, my oldest was having an issue with a friend, and I could tell it was bothering him. And I didn't want to pry, though, because I knew that he, like always, would come around and talk about it when he was willing to. And so right when I was saying goodnight to him, I asked him if he wanted to talk. I said, is something bothering you? And he said yes. And I asked him if it was about, the friend. And he said yes. And I said, do you want to talk about it? And he said no. And I said, okay, well, if you want to talk about it, you know that I'm always here to listen. And he said, I know. He said, that's one of the best things about you, is that I know that you will always listen, and I know that you're not going to try and pry it out of me. And so that right there shows me that we have established a rule that I am always available to listen to you when you have a problem. But we've also established a rule that he has the right to disclose his information at his own pace when he is ready. And so that has set up an open, stable communication pattern between the two of us. And it's the rules that have allowed that to happen. That's a communication behavior. Those are communication behavior rules. And so over time, we have established that, just like over time, we have established all of these different rules. Even though we have these wonderful rules that govern the behaviors of our families and keep our family systems running smoothly, sometimes people will break those rules. And when that happens, certain emotions arise in us. And like the friend who asked about her 2 children, we have the tendency to overreact. And that overreaction is when we allow those emotions to arise in us and allow that to be the way that we respond to the situation. Instead, recognize those emotions as they're arising and put a name on them, put a feeling on them, understand why, and critically think about them and take a beat, and instead recognize that you can't control those reactions and you can't control those emotions, but you can control the way you respond to them, and instead respond to them in a way that is more targeted towards what you are trying to accomplish with the situation. And if you can't catch it in time and you do have that tendency to react instead of respond sometime, go easy on yourself. Understand that you are a work in progress and don't overreact to the overreaction. Instead, respond with kindness to that situation. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you're going to come back for episode 4. We're going to talk about ambiguous loss and how it's okay to grieve some of those traditions and behaviors that you did enjoy as your kids start to grow out of them. So please reach out to me if you have questions or any issues that you'd like to talk about. Reach me at jen@reframing_me.com or on socials on Instagram or on Twitter. And I look forward to chatting more about your changing and growing families.